People do anything to avoid this demeaning experience, but in general, they typically narrow their life, spend more time at home, perhaps in bed, because they are most vulnerable to feelings of shame when they leave the protection of their narcissistic retreat and come into direct contact with others. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. In today's episode, we'll explore another facet of narcissism, shame. I've touched on shame in prior episodes, in particular in relation to depression in episode 15. This time, we'll take a fresh perspective on shame, a complex emotional state that's central to NPD and can be understood through various conceptual frameworks. One of the main characteristics in NPD, whether it's conscious or unconscious, is shame. This is a powerful and oftentimes misunderstood emotion. Shame is deeply mortifying, and it's often linked to feelings of being critically observed. Previously, I linked this critical observation to the punitive inner critical voice. Let's look at how shame is closely connected to narcissism, how it can drive a person to either retreat into themselves or lash out to protect their fragile self-esteem. Whether it's subtle shyness or profound humiliation, shame impacts our behavior in surprising ways. How does shame impact our behavior? You may now be asking. In the psychoanalytic literature, one way to conceptualize shame is to link it to being seen. One feels as if they are faced by an observer who, quote unquote, watches them critically and looks down on them. It's important to note this can either be real or imagined. In other words, this critical judging watcher can come from within. This is known as projection. People do anything to avoid this demeaning experience, but in general, they typically narrow their life, spend more time at home, perhaps in bed, because they are most vulnerable to feelings of shame when they leave the protection of their narcissistic retreat and come into direct contact with others. What is an example of a narcissistic retreat? You may try a new sport or take up a hobby, only to feel that you're being criticized or judged by others. The hobby is short-lived, so instead of going to play, pickleball, you retreat to the safety of your home. Where does this deep feeling of shame originate? Where does it come from? You may now be asking. This feeling of shame, like most narcissistic characteristics, starts early in life. A simple example is when one is a child who expresses an emotional need and seeks attention. The caregiver conveys an emotional state which might mean joy or validation. In the past, I've used concepts like emotional resonance or affect attunement. You may have heard me allude to this before. Or the caregiver may respond with disapproval, rejection, or accusation. You call this a clean room? Or you missed a spot here. As you can imagine, when there are many of these experiences, they become linked in with later feelings of self-consciousness, embarrassment, and shame. Wait, can you give me an example of how this shame is present later in life? Picture this example. She's very excited and looking forward to date night. He arrives 15 minutes late because of some work obligation. She becomes enraged and begins attacking him. Why does she need to respond in this way? One explanation, to stay close to this topic of shame, is in her accusations and attack, she can attempt to regain a narcissistic position where she can now turn the shame of a perceived rejection into triumph. So, to be very clear, the shame disappears. Remember earlier I said it can be and I quote, unconscious. What if the shame is split off and projected? Okay, let's think about that. What does that even mean? To stay with this example, she can also blame him for being irresponsible or a bad partner, therefore parking her shame in him. In short, when there are moments of investment, excitement, receiving something good, or even the potential of receiving something good, or when one expresses appreciation and may thank you for being there for them, this is a positive prognostic sign. With someone who's narcissistically vulnerable, such moments give a glimpse of a capacity for gratitude, and these moments indicate to me that change is possible and one can be hopeful. However, be prepared. You have to keep in mind that excitement, contact, appreciation, all of these more genuine emotions can easily be obstructed simply because this kind of contact, expressing this kind of need, can lead someone who's narcissistically vulnerable to feel humiliation and shame. At such moments, these individuals return to rage and withdraw once again into their defensive system of moral superiority, anger, or omnipotence. They may then minimize your need for attachment. And by the way, their own need for attachment as well. That's that whole dismissive attitude that I've spoken about many times in prior episodes. So yes, I'm asking you to look beyond the rage and self-righteousness and begin to consider that you may be blaming others or retreating to your room to avoid dealing with and thinking about the more painful feeling of shame. Okay, we have to begin to wrap it up here. I encourage you to reach out with any questions or comments regarding shame, which is a very complicated and crippling emotional state. This topic is undeniably complex. Additionally, I have supporting resources available, including a soon-to-be-released continuing education seminar and videos on all topics related to narcissism. These resources can be accessed through my website, which is linked below. Until next time, engage your mind and continue exploring the depths of psychodynamic theory and techniques to improve your relationships. Bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.